discussed conservative batting and we've discussed experience leading up to the World T20. Now we move on to discuss a very important thing this time with Dan, and that is wrist spin in T20s. Hello and welcome to everyone to this third episode of Wrong Ones with Weston. We once again have Dan Weston with us along with Somesh Agarwal and myself, who's Gurkirat Singh Gill. So moving on to the Mythbusters. Dan, the very first myth, putting you on the spot straight away. How important is a wrist spinner in a T20 11? Do you think teams can do without it, or do you think it's become an absolute necessity in the format?
It's such an interesting question, Gurkharat, and welcome to everyone on the show for our third episode. When T20 started, I think that everyone thought that the spin would become a little bit obsolete, but in fact, it's actually now the reverse is the case a lot of the time, particularly in certain conditions, and even in unhelpful conditions, I do feel that a wrist spinner is virtually mandatory with regards to a roster construction. We see in the IPL that teams are very, very reticent not to go into a match without a high quality leg spinner. We also seen that very, very evident in the 100 drafts so far, where these players were prioritised quite significantly as well. And in fact, when my team, Birmingham Phoenix, didn't draft a leg spinner in the last draft, but there was still spots available for wildcards subsequently, there was some conversation about whether we were going to pick up a leg spinner because we hadn't had one so far. And obviously, then we subsequently did pick up a leg spinner in the wildcard, which was kind of probably was the plan. At Leicester this year, for me as well, I've been very, very lucky to see the development of Rayhan Ahmed, who's 17 years old this summer he was, and absolute precocious talent, and he really, really, really did change things for Leicestershire with the ball compared to the previous season where he didn't play T20s. It's that mystery. It's the matchups against the right-hander a lot of the time. The turning the ball away from the right-hander is critical for spin matchups, and having those players who can do that at a high quality is a real asset for any team to have. The other thing that's always worth considering as well is that generally speaking, particularly in countries like India, Australia, and England, is that the domestic players tend to either not be able to play spin as well as if they do pace, and particularly spin turning away from them, or they don't strike at a particularly high strike rate against the ball turning away from them as well. So having that wrist spinner in your team is a fantastic weapon to have in your armory as both a defensive and an attacking option, really.
You've actually given me the perfect line to start my next question with. You said it depends upon whether they want to be defensive or attacking. Now a lot of ex-cricketers and a lot of people feel that wrist spinners or spinners in general are attacking options. It is okay even if they go for a runs. Someone like Gautam Gambhir even said this to the extent that he'd rather take a 3 for 40 from a wrist spinner than 0 for 25. Now, I want to know this from you, who's been part of various squad constructions, that do you also look at, a wrist spinner in that manner, or do you look for a flexibility in a wrist spinner? Also, do you really believe that, a 3 for 40, forget a wrist spinner, a 3 for 40 is better than a 0 for 25 from any bowler? Because the likes of Rashid as well as Narayan have said it, that now they look to, stop runs, because if they stop runs, they know that wickets will come at the other end. So I want to know, what is your view on this whole issue?
Yeah, I probably lean towards Rashid Khan and Narayan's point of view, where we have that economical kind of 0 for 25 or 4 overs, just over 6 economy, that's going to put pressure on the other end or put pressure on the run rate required or whatever it might be, and it's almost like it provides an assist for another bowler. I think it's still fairly contextual though. So for example, if you've got a wrist spinner who bowls in the power play, which is pretty rare, But if you do have one, then the value of early wickets is such that perhaps that you can look to gamble a little bit in terms of buying a wicket. But on the whole, I do definitely agree with the defensive option. And I mean, if you lock in a runner ball for 4 overs, and then you've got someone else who can do that as well. For example, you've gone 50 off 8 overs, for example. It's very, very difficult for the opposition to really hit massive scores when they're going to have to go well over 10 and over to hit like 180 plus, for example.
Right. So, Dan, I just have a follow-up question on this. Is it even possible for wrist spinners to be defensive options, or if a team wants more of a defensive option, they should go for a finger spinner? So, for example, let's set Rashid aside because he is exceptional. Let's talk of someone like a Yuzvendra Chahal, and this is something that we have discussed within each other a lot of times. Like, for example, when India needs Chahal to bowl defensively, I mean, just bowl an over where he's not giving a lot of runs rather than go for wickets. He has struggled to do that, whereas he enjoys giving those loop and bowl in channels where he'll go for runs, but he'll get wickets. But that might not be needed in certain situations. So, do you feel it's different for wrist spinners to be of the defensive mindset?
Yeah, I do to some degree. I think there's probably a similar conversation that we're having in England at the moment with regards to someone like Matt Parkinson, for example, who's a very, very attacking leg spinner, doesn't bowl particularly fast, but will get a lot of wickets in that attacking manner. Now, I think if you're looking at it, I think that obviously there's various approaches to the same art, if you like, but that's no different to batting, really. Like asking an attacking leg spinner to bowl defensively is akin to asking Tim David or Andre Russell to play like an anchor. That's not what you've brought them into the team for. That's not their role in the team. So for me, it's always a case of playing to a player's strengths rather than asking them to perform a skill that they're not particularly strong at. And if you want that defensive leg spinner, you don't pick a Chahal or a Matt Parkinson. You just pick somebody different.
One last question on this subject: how important is speed for a leg spinner? Because what we have seen is that post 2016 2017 there has been an influx of fast wrist spinners, and before that there was only Samuel Badri who could bowl those 3 overs in the power play very economically, and set a platform for other bowlers, and wherein they could just come in and start bowling those attacking lengths and get wickets. So how important is speed for a leg spinner? Because I believe that also somewhere allows a greater margin for error.
Yeah, I think it's also related to quality as well. So among the research that I've done when I'm doing opposition scouting, for example, there's not a great deal of evidence to show that as the higher quality among the higher quality wrist spinners, at least, that speed is a major factor. I think probably where speed's a bigger factor is when you're looking at the more occasional or the sort of weaker squad options. That there's a problem.
Is opening the easiest position to bat in T20 cricket? Because we've seen almost every batter, if you ask them where would you bat, they would end up saying an opener. And we saw Cameron Green, who's not basically is an opener, but just came and slogged everyone around the park. So I mean, let's settle this. Is opening the easiest position to bat? And second, can anyone open in T20 cricket?
To answer the first question, yeah, absolutely, and like you say, Suresh, I think that the vast majority of players will be delighted if you ask them to open rather than batting in a different role. But yeah, obviously we know that for those listeners and viewers who aren't so well versed with the rules of cricket, that there are fielding restrictions in the first 6 overs generally of the T20. And so it's easier to find gaps and score boundaries in the power play. Now there is a kind of, I think you could probably even say, like, there's a power play tax to batters, if you like, in terms of their run production. And interestingly, yesterday I saw on Twitter, people are sort of starting to talk about things like percentage of middle overs batted when you're looking at a player's overall strike rate in comparison, for example. So there is this awareness now that batting in the power play is a little bit easier than other phases. Although I will give one caveat to that, really, and that is that sometimes it is hard to go for batters in the power play if there's not a lot of depth in the batting group. I've spoken to a lot of players, and they're much more comfortable going harder in the power play if you bat down to 9 or something like that, with very competent batters down to 9, than if your tail starts at 7. If you pick six batters and 5 bowlers, there's much less confidence to go harder in the power play, and there's always that thing in the back of their mind that they're thinking, well, if we lose 3 wickets in the power play, we're in big trouble. Now, so obviously that's to do with roster construction and things like that. But as I say, on the whole, I think any batter would be delighted to be asked to open the batting.
So
a follow-up question.
Coming to the follow-up question, Dan. I mean, can anyone be an opener? Like, for example, I mean, someone like say for like a Dinesh Karthik or anyone who has been a finisher all his life and suddenly is sent to open. Is that so straightforward?
I think it depends on the conditions. So if we're playing in conditions where there's a lot likely to be some seam movement up front and perhaps bowler friendly conditions for the first couple of overs or 3-4 overs, then that could be a tricky assignment for any batter, let alone whether it's someone who's unfamiliar with opening or not. So I think it really does depend. If we know that the ball's not going to move much to start with, then I do think that it does give license to unfamiliar batters to really have a go at opening if the situation dictates it, for sure.
Another follow-up question that I have. There's always this debate and conversation that whether you want there's always a lot of conversation between having a dasher opener or having an opener that can bat long and make up for the end. So if it were up to you, who would you choose? Would you pick a 30-150 kind of an opener who averages 30 and strikes at 150? Or would you rather pick someone who averages 40 and goes at a strike rate of around 135?
Yeah, I think that this is, again, it's all to do with roster construction and the resources that are at your disposal in terms of the playing pool that you can choose from. So, for example, in an auctioning environment, then I'm much more minded to go for the attacking option because there's plenty of them, and we know that there's a plentiful resource, and theoretically, at least, we should be able to acquire a competent bowling lineup, it does have to work in tandem because you do need to win that boundary count on a regular basis to be successful in matches. So you've got to be able to not just score them, but you've got to be able to somehow prevent them as well to a large degree. I think where it comes in is in terms of those sort of more defensive anchor style batters, if you like, the Rizwans and the Babars of this world, is that you're then looking at international cricket a little bit more in terms of the player pool and what you've got to choose from as your domestic talent. Now, Pakistan in that situation, I know we've gone through Pakistan a little bit in show number 1, but with regards to those players, they've got such a good bowling lineup. You can indulge that approach a lot more than if you're, say, England, who don't have a great bowling lineup. I think England would be in big trouble with that approach. But so it is kind of horses for courses to some degree, and weirdly for a batting decision, it is often reliant on the strength of the bowlers that you've got in your squad as well.
So I think that's it for Mythbusters today. Now we'll move on to our next section, which is Road to the World Cup, and we have a team which is probably the most debated team all the time, or one of the teams that have the that have the largest fan base, and no prize for guessing. We are talking about the Indian team. Dan, India have released their squad, but obviously there are more than a few concerns. There are never a few concerns with the Indian team, given how the fan base is. But what are your first thoughts on the Indian squad for the World T20?
Well, my first thought is obviously it's a very strong squad. We know that these players are high quality marquee names, and certainly they're going to be one of 4 or 5 contenders for the title. I think probably one of the favourites, if not the favourite for the title. Now, for me, I look at the squad and I look at the lineups that have been playing against Australia in these warm-up matches, particularly yesterday, which I watched a fantastic match, and I think that the top 3 are critical for India. The success or failure of the top 3 in Australia is going to be make or break for India's success in this tournament to start with. So we've got KL Rahul, Rohit Sharma, and Virat Kohli. Now, all 3 players, I think, have a growing disposition to chew up balls at the top of the order. And certainly we've seen KL Rahul's quotes over the last week or so almost doubling down on that approach and thinking, reinforcing the fact that almost like that famous quote, strike rate doesn't matter. Memo to him, it actually does. We now got Rohit Sharma in his advancing years and perhaps not quite the force of old, and Kohli, who's come into some semblance of form. I think it's probably fair to say, with the 60-odd yesterday and a ton against Afghanistan recently in the Asia Cup, but still isn't really doing it at a particularly high strike rate the vast majority of the time. I still think that there's the well-publicised issues with being very defensive against spin on the whole that's going to be a problem, even in the Australian conditions, which maybe not spin heavy as others, because people will still view him as potentially a defensive target that they can get cheaper overs out of as a matchup target as well. So I do feel that the top 3, the success or failure of the top 3 will be critical, because if we've already seen India in the last World Cup, almost the first couple of matches kind of not giving themselves the chance, there will be regrets of how those couple of matches played out in the World Cup last time. If you get rolled cheap, sometimes you can say, well, you know what, we gave it a go. That happens in cricket sometimes, but we risked 120 to get 180 or whatever it might be. But when you kind of score low strike rates and stuff and perhaps leave resources out there, you're going to have those regrets. And I think it's important for those top 3 to really fire and give Suryakumar Yadav and Hardik Pandya and Dinesh Karthik, Rishabh Pant, if he plays, the license to go real hard and set that platform for the more attacking batters to come in afterwards. The other issues I feel is perhaps, depending on how they structure up, the absence of Jadeja and bringing in Akshar Patel lengthens the tail, I think, and certainly lengthens the tail in terms of a hitting perspective. And there's the slight nagging doubt about Bumrah's fitness, but I think that I'm very, very happy to go into a tournament with that. If that's my doubt, I'm not too worried about it, because obviously we know that he's a world-class player, and 75% fit Bumrah is probably still in the top 10 percentile of bowlers. Bhuvneshwar Kumar obviously would be another player who has something to prove, I think, really over the last year or so, and again went for runs yesterday. Now kind of, I think, probably should be pigeonholed in that power play bowling role most of the time, but then that leaves the question of balance a little bit up in the air as well, and it doesn't really look like there's a complete like for like replacement for him in the squad either if he does struggle. And it was good to see Chahal pick up some cheap overs yesterday, one for 22, because obviously there's been a lot of discussion about him and his role in the side lately as well. So for me, yeah, top three and some bowling decisions are India's main hurdles, but even considering that, they look strong.
Okay, so Dan, I have a lot of follow-up questions. I'll start one by one. So first up, about Rohit Sharma, you mentioned that he's not the same force as we have seen he has been at times. But is it due to him not being in the same touch, or just because of his approach? Essentially, this year, especially after taking over captaincy, he's battled like a Sunil Narayan, like going gung ho from ball one and just having zero care about his wicket. So I mean, it is a positive in some sense.
Yeah, so I look at it more kind of rounded view in terms of not just his performances for India, but also performances for MI as well.
Yeah, I mean, those two have always not gone hand in hand. So let's just stick to India, right?
Yeah. So for me, like, there's kind of like that general view where I think maybe he's not quite the player of old, and I think that it'll be, and on that subject of MI, I think it'll be really interesting to see how they handle that over the coming years in terms of, do they keep hold of a player for too long, or do they kind of make a ruthless decision and free up some budget and let someone else kind of take the hit from a decline perspective? But yeah, I mean, if he wants to go more attacking, then I'm all for that when you've got Rahul and Kohli sandwiching him.
Yeah. Okay. So coming to India's top three now. And I know we discussed this, the same thing about Pakistan, that Rizwan and Babar's approach worked because they have a very good bowling attack.
Yes.
But when it comes to India, I mean, considering their bowling attack, what should be the approach of top three? Do all three have to just be attacking all the time, or can they do two attacking, one defensive? Not defensive, but anchorish.
I know what you mean, yeah. I think probably the 2 and 1 would work well with the current likely India 11 going into the World Cup, because they don't have the best batting depth, so they do need to be a little bit cognizant of that. Now, if they had Jadeja in for Akshar Patel and maybe another all-rounder who can hit at 8, for example, and then have Harshal at 9 or something like that would lend themselves to having, I think, more of an attacking approach as open as where you can go all three. The problem is that for me is that the KL Rahul and Virat are so almost wedded into this approach that I think it's going to be very, very hard for either of them to change. Certainly starting off innings quickly. And I think more than anything, as a cricket supporter, I think it's a real shame, because they're two absurdly talented players, and I think any cricket fan would pay good money to watch them smash the ball around the ground, but they're not gonna pay so much money to watch them nerdle it around, and from a visual perspective as well. I would love to see them take the attack to the opposition a lot more.
Yeah. So. Dan, there is a general consensus that between Rahul and Kohli, Rahul has more of the ability to just hit a 6 from ball one, whereas Kohli is better suited to just buy his time and play according to the situation. So do you think that is the ideal role definition, if at all India wants to define the role for the top three?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. We've seen more evidence of that from KL Rahul at times than Kohli, especially over recent years. So yeah, I would agree with that completely.
Okay, cool.
Also, I just want to. But
yeah, good. Go ahead.
You spoke that both Rahul and Kohli are so welded into that approach that it might be difficult for them. But given how Kohli has batted recently, and Rahul in those 4 matches, don't you think, like, for Kohli especially, there's been a conscious effort to take more risk in the power play and even in his innings? Because yesterday as well, he was 33 of 22 at one point of time, and then he was 46 of 32. After which he lost his way a little bit, because I thought that he was trying too hard and losing his shape. But you really think that that both of them can't come out of that approach?
I don't think it's likely to happen. I would love to see it, And you know, but we're talking about two of the most talented T20 batters of the last decade. So you would like to think that they've got the skill set to do it. It's just, I think, for me, it's more of a mentality thing for both of them, that they think that their way is best, and that's their prerogative, but it hasn't always proven to be right in the past.
What's your best India 11? Going into the World T20.
Well, that's a tough question, because the India 11 that I might have picked if I had free reign is perhaps a little different to the one that might get picked now.
So we can talk about both, Dan. The India 11 from the squad and India 11 that you would have wanted to pick.
So I like the more attacking batsmen, for example. So a Prithvi Shaw or Sanju Samson or someone like that, rather than perhaps some other options. The key for me, I think, the key decision for me is how India fit Rishabh Pant into this team, and if he does fit into the team, and if he doesn't fit into the team, I think it's such a shame, because he came onto the T20 scene as this young, fearless player, full of intent and bravery and attacking options, and we've seen that time after time in Test cricket as well. He's so good to watch in Test cricket. A real talent and a unique talent, I think. But with, I don't know. I don't know if it's been coached out of him, or whether it's been asked for him to play different roles when he's played for DC or India. But we've almost seen him like, I don't know, like he's just gone into his shell too much, and whether that's a responsibility thing, I don't know, or he feels like he should play, or he's been told to play responsibly, and it's such a shame, because I think that it's diluted that natural talent and his natural attacking intent and instinct that he showed when he first broke onto the scene. And like I say, he's shown in other formats on a consistent basis. And he's effectively now lost his place to a veteran keeper who last year was commentating in England, and that's a real shame. I mean, obviously, I think Dinesh Karthik's still a fantastic player, but I want to see Rishabh Pant play. Like he really is. He is someone who I would pay money to watch at his peak, and I don't think he's necessarily going to play. And I think that the lineup that they played against Australia last night may not be too dissimilar to their starting 11 for the World Cup. The question mark for me is whether they go with an Arshdeep Singh but I don't think they can pick an Arshdeep for Harshal Patel, because the tail looks super long if you do that, and obviously you're not going to pick it for Bumrah if Bumrah's got any semblance of fitness. So it's really an Arshdeep Singh for Bhuvneshwar Kumar kind of debate, I think.
Yep. So again, Dan, two follow-up questions. One, from the 11 that fielded yesterday in the third ODI against Australia, if you have to pick Pant, who would you replace him with? If you have the chance to just replace him with anyone, even the captain.
Oh, that's a question. Yeah. Well, the captain is not the worst shout in the world, actually, because I actually think that Kohli's best position is opening, and Pant's best position is coming in towards the end of the power play, or just after the end of the power play, sort of over sort of 4 to 7, that entry point, if you like. So yeah, maybe that could work. Obviously that's not going to happen, but unless Rohit Sharma gets injured at least, and then it will still require some creative thought potentially from the India think tank. But yeah, no, that could work.
But that was me putting thought. I mean, what do you think? I mean, you have other options as well.
Well, the other option,
you're not particularly happy with KL and Kohli's approach, so
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, if it wasn't for some recent runs from Kohli, I would have been in for Kohli all day long. Just slot straight in at 3.
Yep.
The thing that I think that India will do is that they'll view it as a like for like with Dinesh Karthik.
And so, yeah, the second question that I had was Arshdeep, because I mean, in terms of numbers, his numbers at the death have been pretty good this year,
Very good, yeah.
which is something that India have struggled. Plus, he's the left armour option. So, I mean, we feel that he's a certainty, maybe in place of Bhuvi or Harshal, but Bhuvi more likely because, like you mentioned, Bhuvi is essentially a new ball bowler, whereas Arshdeep is a more all-phase bowler. Do you agree? I mean, India's best 11 would be what played yesterday and just swapping Arshdeep with Bhuvi.
Yeah, I would swap Arshdeep in for Bhuvi all day long. Yeah, I think that for me that time has now come where you dispense with the experience and you give the young player who's now I think it's fair to say really proven his ability over several seasons of the IPL and since he's come into the India team as well. And he offers that more phase flexibility than Bhuvi does, and I think that now you have to say that that's the case. Definitely, the extra variety as well. It just seems to make complete sense.
My question. I have another question. What do you make of Ravichandran Ashwin coming in for Yuzvendra Chahal, and him getting a trial run of sorts against South Africa, because South Africa will have 3 left-handers in the top 5. There's Quinton de Kock, there's Riley Rossouw, and there is David Miller. So, or do you think because Hardik's rested for that series, India will anyway play Deepak Hooda? Do you think they'll try Deepak Hooda bowling in the power play, or do you think Ashwin will get those runs? Because I don't see Deepak Hooda getting into the 11 in the World T20 against South Africa, and India also play South Africa in Perth, so which is a venue that will favor South Africa far more than India.
Yeah, so I'm the same as you. I don't see Deepak Hooda getting into the team. I just don't really see how he fits into this jigsaw. Now it would be an Ashwin versus Chahal, in terms of that spin versus spin, but obviously they're very different players. In terms of Ashwin is much more of a defensive off spinner, whereas Chahal is that attacking wrist spinner. Now, as you mentioned, Gurku, against a team with 3 left-handers in the top 5, if you're going to play Ashwin, that's the time to play him. And this is, however, does again highlight the deficiency of the India group, which I think I mentioned in last week's show. They don't have really any bowling options or spin bowling options in the top 6 that they can use as that match-up spinner. For example, how Australia used Glenn Maxwell or England used Moeen Ali, for example. And that would
or
be
South Africa use Markram.
Yeah, exactly. So it's so useful for teams to have that in their roster, and India don't have that. So let's say, for the sake of argument, Surya Kumar Yadav bowled off spin, then you could still keep Chahal in the team, and you wouldn't need to play Ashwin against the team of left-handers. But against a team of left-handers or 3 in the top 5, you might want to go with Ashwin over Chahal, and especially it's more of a cautious decision in terms of lengthening that batting lineup as well in the first game, which maybe India might be tempted to do in an early stage match.
So in your first 11, because speaking personally, in my first 11 I'd rather have Ashwin at 8 with Bhuvi, Arshdeep and Bumrah in the as 9, 10, 11, with Ashwin at 8 and Akshar being at 7. Would that be, you've already spoken that you will probably go with Harshal over Bhuvi.
Yeah.
But would your first choice spinner will be Ashwin or will it be Chahal? Because Chahal's not been in great form. He's leagued runs. Ashwin, on the other hand, since his comeback, has done reasonably well. There's only I don't think there's been more than I think there's only been one game where Ashwin has gone for more than 8 runs per over.
Yeah. So if you don't play Ashwin against a team with 3 left-handers in the top 5, I'm not really sure why you got him in the squad. And so for me, against a South Africa team with that dynamic, you could look to play Ashwin at 8 and then Harshal at 9, or vice versa, depending on the match situation. I personally would still lean towards Harshal over Bhuvneshwar Kumar, even with the fact that then you've got 3 death bowlers, if you like, in terms of Arshdeep and Bumrah. But I think all of them have ability in other phases to bowl effectively as well, and there's still plenty of balance, I think, in that lineup as well. And having that extra batting as well is quite nice too. And so for me, yeah, I think that I would go with Ashwin over Chahal just in that particular matchup. And it brings on to another really interesting point as well about destigmatizing being dropped from a team in terms of, well, yeah, you're not playing in this match, but there's a reason for that. It's a tactical decision. It's a strategic decision that I think any player should be able to understand. And it's a squad of 15. It's not a team of 11. And for me, it's important for players to start trying to get their head around that horses selections and that you're not necessarily picking the best 11 players. You're picking the best 11 players who are suited for the task at hand, which may or may not be different to the best 11 players who are suited to the task in the next game, for example. And I think that's a really interesting point as well.
Okay, Dan, last 2 follow-up questions to wrap up India. One is on Akshar. I mean, we've spoken about how losing Jadeja has hit India's batting, overall batting composition. But do you feel it has strengthened their bowling? Because Akshar is far better bowler than Jadeja, at least from my observation, in T20 cricket. He can bowl across phases. That's one. And second, how can India utilize his batting better?
One, I think you're right in terms of the bowling edge. But the problem is it does have that knock-on effect. The tail is longer, and I'm sure that the top 3 will be cognizant of that as well. And that's potentially an issue that will need to be resolved, or is an implication that could be a problem in the tournament. If there's the old adage that 3 wickets in the power play is a disaster, but when you've got a long tail or semi-tail starting at 7, it's even more of a disaster.
But they can sort it out by promoting Akshar and then have Ashwin at 8 and Harshal at 9, which is, I mean, as good a depth as possible.
Yeah, but where would you bat Akshar in that situation, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that was my follow-up question. I mean, do you think his game against spin warrants a promotion?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, is a question of resources, and will his spin production be better than a Kohli or a Suryakumar Yadav? Is ultimately the question that you have to answer in that situation. What you don't want to do is waste a load of resources because you push someone up the order who doesn't perhaps have that natural attacking intent or power that some of the other players have. And this is even though we saw yesterday with Liam Dawson for England, it's actually a similar situation that England are in terms of, yes, Dawson hit, I think it was 34 of 17 yesterday, but that's really like a career best, like not in terms of numbers of runs, but in terms of like peak strike rate and stuff like that. It really was a big shot considering his general approach and boundary percentage. So it's almost like sometimes I feel that some countries they think, okay, well, this guy, he's a bowler but he can bat, so we'll just shove him in at 7 and see what happens, kind of thing. And they don't actually realise that 7 is a critical position for maintaining momentum or bringing that impetus into the last few overs where really sometimes the game is won and lost.
Okay. Lastly, you have the entire squad with you. Every player in India is there, fit to select. What would your best 11 be for the World Cup?
Oh, I wish I'd known this question in advance. I might have to withdraw the question and answer it next week when I've done some more research.
Sure, yeah.
But
we'll come back to that.
It'll probably be a little bit different, yeah.
Okay, so
let's just twist it a little. Who do you like? omission of which player from the squad, from the India squad, has disappointed you the most? It could be two players as well.
I personally would like to have seen. I like very, very, very attacking openers, and I think that Prithvi Shaw has done that. Obviously, there's other considerations at play that people might say, and sometimes I do feel that India's team and selection is a little bit sort of seniority based to some degree. It's a controversial take, but prior to the Asia Cup, I wouldn't have picked Kohli either. And I would have picked I don't know, like if he was playing well, an Ishan Kishan or a Sanju Samson, someone who's got a lot more intent than Kohli in those middle overs. But I think we've seen enough recently to give him a little bit more time. Pant over Kartik, as they have a peak Pant would be for me would be a must, but where you put him in the batting order, I think is critical. And moving forward, over looking at some of the younger players as well, how far away do you think Bishnoi is from getting a go? I like to see him get more game time for India over the next cycle for sure.
Bishnoi was pretty much into the mix, and I personally feel that he was unlucky to miss out. But I think
Bishnoi is an injury away from actually drafting into the 11 itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or a niggle, as it is called in Indian circles. But I think that now we move on to the next section now, wherein we've got some questions from the fans. And I don't think there's any. I don't think there's much left to discuss Indian team anymore, unless we really go into the finer points, which will probably take the whole day.
But we will come back to Dan's best 11 next week.
Yeah, in the viewers' corner, there's this one question by Subhamaya Biswas. He's asking, what do you do mid-tournament and sometimes even mid-game when players show new aspect of their game that you haven't planned against previously? For example, David Miller's game against spin in the last IPL. How do you counter something that is something that you didn't expect to happen post pre-tournament?
I think that the approach in game is very, very difficult. In the middle of a match is very, very difficult to the middle of the tournament. So in the middle of the match, you've generally done all your preparation and in advance, and you've spoken to the coach about your plans and discussed matters with the captain, or the coach has discussed it all with the captain, or whatever it might be. And then you just go out and play, and it's very, very difficult, I think, to have a significant influence on the match once the players have stepped over the white line and onto the pitch. Yes, people will say, well, what about strategic timeouts and stuff like that? But actually, I find that they often cause as many problems as they solve, and perhaps aren't quite as much used to teams as they might be to advertisers, for example.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you've got a player, I mean, it has happened to me a few times, not often, but on some rare occasions, if you've got a player who you've assigned certain matchups to, or you've made a point that they're not strong at something, and suddenly they go out and blitz you from when you're not expecting them to. That I think you have to ride it a little bit, because it's such a rare instance that there's not really a great deal that you can do. In tournament, I think it's a bit different. So, say for example, in the middle of a tournament, especially in the IPL, which is a long tournament. Let's say everyone's played 7 games, and there was a player who you played the team first game, and subsequently they found this like young superstar who's that you didn't expect to play, and they didn't play in the first game, but subsequently has come in and played incredibly, then you're going to have to really construct some plans on him, and this is where sometimes it can be quite difficult for younger players as their career evolves in the short term, at least, because they start being analysed a lot more very, very, very quickly. And some people call it second season syndrome or something like that, but I think it could even happen a little bit quicker than that as well, where suddenly 2 or 3 match or not necessarily match win, but match contributed performances suddenly be like, right, okay, well, now he's a key member of the team, we're going to plan for him, and we're going to study his video, we're going to study his data, what does he do well, what does he not do well, and generally also with teams, you're going to have some form of a mid-season review as well, generally, to work out your strengths and weaknesses, the opposition strengths and weaknesses, and things like that. So any kind of well-organised team would really, in the middle of a tournament, if dynamics had changed, they would be well on top of that.
Dan, I'm assuming, especially around the mid-game question, I'm assuming teams will have more than one plan, right? I mean, for a player, if plan A doesn't work, if someone was thought to be susceptible against spin, but on that day, he's just reading everything off the hand, there has to be a plan B, and I'm assuming most of the good coaches, good analysts have more than one plan for a particular battle.
Yeah, definitely. Although there might be a predominant plan, depending on who the player is. Yeah, there's going to be more than one plan, and sometimes that plan B might just literally be general phase options or something like that. Like it's just don't upset the apple cart kind of thing. I'm also quite big on that sort of phase role clarity as well. So for example, let's say you've got 2 bowlers who always bowl 17 and 19 and 18 and 20, or some combination of those 4 overs between them, and they've but one of them or 2 of them has been smashed in their first 2 overs. I'm still pretty keen on bringing them back rather than substituting in, for example, like an all-rounder or something like that. The death who's unfamiliar at bowling death, because you've picked those players in the team for a reason. You pick them players because they're strong in a role, and you back them to execute their skills. So sometimes, like I say, phase plans are as important as match-up plans as well. And usually there'll be, for me, so for example, in terms of matchups and plans, there might be 1 or 2 higher value options for the team. There might be 3 or 4 mid-range mid-range options for the team. So there's still that flexibility. There's still opportunities to go with plan B or plan C or whatever it might be. It's not something that I think is strictly set in stone in terms of those matchups. And I never would ask the captain to say, okay, well, you've got to do it in this order. For me, that's not reasonable. Most teams will have a chat about potentially like a power play distribution and a death distribution or something like that, which obviously oftentimes that takes care of itself, the death, a lot of the time. But power play distribution you might have a chat about it, but then you leave that up to the captain. He's got his own feel. He knows the players as well, and obviously, let's say for sake of argument, if you've got a really strict power play distribution and they open with a left-right combo and you get the right-hander out and they bring another left-hander in at 3, and suddenly you want your off-spinner to bowl. You don't want to go with like your whatever it might be that you've got on for over 2 in your plans. You've got to have some degree of flexibility with it. But I think generally, as long as the captain knows kind of like what resources are strong in what phases and in what instances that you should use those type of players in, then you can leave it down to them, and they're pretty capable, most of them.
Dan, another question that I have with just with respect to tactics is that as an analyst, when you are strategizing for a team, before you sort of put an idea into a bin, right? What do you think is the ideal sample space to try out a tactic? Do you think it's 6 or 7 games, or do you think even 10, 14 games aren't enough? Because one analyst told me that even 1 season isn't probably enough to test out an idea or test out a tactic. So let alone 3 or 4 games. Where do you stand on this?
That's a very, very good question and difficult one to answer. To a large degree, I agree with the other analyst about 14 games. So, for example, the 14-game IPL season is it seems long, and most people would say it's long, but it's still less. It's still almost a third of the length of the English Premier League season in terms of the number of matches. And those 38 games that you play in football in Premier League is, I think it's very difficult to then have a huge argument with the league table. But that's almost 3 seasons worth of matches in the IPL. And I've been a little bit vocal on this in the past, is that I think that if the IPL this year had a 38-game season, or like baseball, it might have had 100 games or something like that, I do think that the table would have looked quite different to how it ended up this season. Certainly with the top couple of teams, the new teams, I don't think would have fared so well in a longer season as they did in this shorter season, which does lend itself still to, I think, quite a high variance. If you nail 3, 4, 5 fine margins in a match at the clutch points, then that goes a long way in a 14-game tournament, and I think we saw the evidence of that this year in the IPL. On the flip side, though, I would say that there's been some instances for me tactically where I pushed for a change, and in terms of the structure of not a player for like player, but a complete structural change in terms of the setup of a team and the balance of the team. And I think within 6 overs, we all sat on the bench and said, "Why didn't we do this before?" This was like, and I can think of several. I can't really say it because it's kind of maybe an ongoing thing, but there's been several instances for me of that where literally you can draw a pretty instant conclusion, and the players are walking off the pitch at the end of the game saying, "Yeah, we can't change that structure now." Like it can be that clear cut, but it can also be something. Yeah, it can also, perhaps decisions can have to manifest themselves over long periods of time as well. So yeah, it's a bit nuanced, but on the whole, yeah, I think the other analyst that you spoke to before definitely has a fair point.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Another question that has come from the week. Why do you think we haven't seen a mid-tournament transfer take place yet in the IPL? I think, transfers have happened between seasons, but there hasn't been a mid-tournament transfer in the IPL. Why do you think that hasn't happened yet, despite there being a window for it?
That's a really good question, and something that I don't have the answer in terms of a concrete answer to give here. I think there's probably one is a fear factor among teams to let players go to another team, and then basically look either idiots or that player will be able to share tactics against that particular team. But we've seen in football how mid-season transfer windows are super commonplace. The January transfer window in football is like millions and multi-millions and tens of millions of pounds are spent in this January transfer window in football, and the teams aren't too fussed about who people coming to another team and sharing a tactic, for example, or whatever it might be. Or I think it's something that needs to evolve more in the IPL and evolve more in cricket in general. For me, it would be a fantastic thing to evolve, because it creates that talking point among fans as well, and also I'm all in favour of giving squad players like a greater opportunity as well. And certainly, look at someone like Sai Kishore when he was at CSK. The guy was just like wasted there, just sitting on the bench, and that would have been a really good example of a team, maybe proactively trying to take someone off another team mid-season and utilise someone a lot better. Because when I spoke to a CSK player before the last IPL over the winter, and and I said, talk to me about Cypher Shaw. My numbers say he's an incredible talent and would potentially be a really high level IPL player. And he turned around to me and said he would get into any other team in the IPL. So this is for me that's a great example of a player who maybe would benefit from that, or would have, or a player in a scenario who would have benefited from that mid-season transfer window. And I would love to see it more. I mean, I don't know how much you guys follow Premier League or English, the way that English people cover the Premier League on TV, but like this, like the transfer deadline day, which is the last day of the transfer window in England. I mean, this is like, it's like a national celebration. It's like a huge event where all the sports channels are taken over with like rumours and speculation, and then the confirmed transfers come in, and like, the guy's presenting it, he always wears like the same color tie, and like the whole color scheme is based on this tie that this guy wears and stuff like that. It's just a traditional thing, like there's reporters at every club's training ground and stuff like that, and so they're interviewing the coaches when they're coming out of the car park through their car windows and stuff like that. It's just a fantastic like day of media speculation, and I'm sure that if that happened in the IPL, that would be really enjoyed by the supporters of the IPL as well.
Yep. And I think apart from insecurity, there is also a question of incentives, right? The IPL teams do not really have an incentive to do a mid-season transfer. It's not like they're fighting for survival on money, or they want to take a budget out to buy a certain player, or pay for a certain player's fee or salary or something like that. So there is no real incentive for them to do this.
There's also a possibility that you might make your opponent stronger.
Well, this is the whole thing, and that leads us on to another debate that maybe we haven't got time for to go into great detail today, but in the future will be a fantastic area to debate, is that kind of jeopardy in the IPL in terms of that incentive to improve. If a team's at the bottom of the league after halfway, then maybe they don't have that much incentive to improve, because they know they're like one out of 7 or something like that. They know they're pretty much done in that comp. They don't need to. They don't just splash a load of money to avoid relegation. But let's say that there was two leagues of 10 and the bottom 2 teams got relegated, then they're going to be spending a lot of money in that mid-season transfer window to try and fix the problems that they've got. And I've spoken about relegation in the IPL a few times before, and as unlikely as it probably is, I would love to see it.
Yeah, same here. So,
well, I think that's the perfect that's the perfect way to end the show, because it's opened up a new possibility about something that we all love, which is the IPL. And hopefully on this note,